You know what's brutal about being a writer? It's not just the obvious stuff, the rejection letters, the financial uncertainty, the way people look at you like you've chosen unemployment as a career path. It's the deeper psychological warfare that comes with trying to transform your inner chaos into something coherent enough for strangers to understand. And nobody captured this particular form of creative suffering quite like Charles Bukowski, a man who turned the agony of writing into an art form all its own. Henry Charles Bukowski Jr. came into this world on the 16th of August 1920 in Andernach, Germany, before his family moved to Los Angeles when he was 3. If you're looking for the origins of his later cynicism and rage, you don't have to dig very deep. His father was an abusive tyrant who beat young Charles regularly, often for imagined transgressions. His mother was passive, unable or unwilling to protect her son from the violence that defined their household. Growing up in Depression-era Los Angeles, Bukowski was an outsider from the start, poor, awkward, and plagued by severe acne that left his face permanently scarred. He learned early that the world wasn't particularly interested in being kind to him. School was a nightmare of bullying and humiliation. The only refuge he found was in books, discovering writers like Dostoevsky, Hemingway, and John Fante, who showed him that literature could be raw, honest, and unafraid of ugly truths. But here's where Bukowski's story becomes instructive for anyone trying to understand the peculiar torment of the writing life. After a brief stint at Los Angeles City College, he simply disappeared for nearly a decade. Not literally, he was there, working dead-end jobs, drinking heavily, moving from one dingy apartment to another. But as far as his writing ambitions were concerned, he might as well have vanished. This wasn't writer's block, this was writer's despair, the crushing realization that wanting to be a writer and actually being one are separated by an ocean of doubt, failure, and grinding daily reality. During those lost years, Bukowski worked at the post office, a job that would later become central to his mythology, but was, at the time, simply survival. He'd wake up, sort mail for 8 hours, come home, drink until he passed out, and repeat. Occasionally, he'd try to write something, but mostly he just existed in that liminal space that so many aspiring writers know intimately, not quite living, not quite dying, just marking time, while the dream of being a real writer slowly calcifies into bitter regret. What pulled him back wasn't inspiration or sudden artistic breakthrough. It was near death. In 1955, at age 35, Bukowski was hospitalized with a bleeding ulcer so severe that doctors weren't sure he'd survive. Lying in that hospital bed, faced with his own mortality, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He was going to write, really write, regardless of whether anyone wanted to read it. This is where Bukowski's experience illuminates something crucial about why writing is so damn hard. It's not just that you have to be good at it, though that helps. It's that you have to be willing to fail publicly, repeatedly, while continuing to believe that your particular way of seeing the world matters enough to justify the effort. Bukowski started submitting poems to little magazines, collecting rejection slips like battle scars, slowly building a small but devoted readership among people who appreciated his unflinching honesty about working-class life. The breakthrough came in the 1960s, when John Martin, founder of Black Sparrow Press, offered Bukowski a monthly stipend of $100 if he'd quit his job at the post office and write full-time. It sounds romantic now, the struggling artist finally getting his break, but imagine the terror of that decision. Bukowski was nearly 50, with no safety net, no backup plan, no guarantee that this gamble would pay off. He took the deal anyway, because that's what writers do. They leap into the void and hope their words will break the fall. What followed was an explosion of productivity that would establish Bukowski as one of America's most distinctive voices. Novels like Post Office and Factotum, poetry collections that captured the gritty reality of urban American life, stories that found poetry in the most unlikely places, parking lots, dive bars, race racks, unemployment lines. But success brought its own complications, and this is where Bukowski's experience reveals another layer of why writing is such a challenging profession. See, The thing about writing is that it requires you to be simultaneously vulnerable and tough, open and protected, honest and strategic. You have to be willing to expose your deepest thoughts and feelings, but also thick-skinned enough to handle criticism and rejection. Bukowski managed this paradox by creating a persona, the hard-drinking, woman-chasing, perpetually angry old man, that was both authentic to his experience and protective of his more sensitive interior self. But maintaining that persona became its own prison. Readers and publishers expected him to be Bukowski, the character he'd created, rather than the more complex, evolving human being he actually was. This is a trap that catches many writers. You find a voice that works, that connects with an audience, and suddenly you're stuck performing that voice forever, even when you've outgrown it or want to explore other aspects of your humanity. The drinking, which had started as self-medication for depression and social anxiety, became part of his brand. People expected drunk Bukowski, angry Bukowski, misanthropic Bukowski. The problem was that alcohol was slowly killing him, and the lifestyle that had generated his best material was becoming unsustainable. Yet every time he tried to clean up or evolve, he risked alienating the audience that had finally embraced him. This tension between authenticity and performance haunts most serious writers. You want to write truthfully about your experience, but you also want people to read what you write, which means making it engaging, accessible, marketable. You want to grow as an artist, but you also want to maintain whatever modest success you've achieved. It's like being asked to perform surgery on yourself while running a marathon. Bukowski's later years were marked by this struggle between the wild man his readers expected and the aging human being he actually was. His marriage to Linda Lee Byle in 1985 brought stability and happiness that had been largely absent from his earlier life, but it also complicated his public image. How do you write about contentment when your reputation is built on magnificent discontent? How do you explore tenderness when people expect you to be permanently pissed off? What makes Bukowski's experience particularly relevant to understanding the difficulty of writing is how he navigated the business side of being an author. Unlike many literary writers who affect disdain for commercial concerns, Bukowski was refreshingly honest about wanting to make money from his work. He understood that financial security would free him to write without constantly worrying about survival, but he also knew that commercial success could corrupt artistic integrity. His solution was characteristically direct. He wrote what he wanted to write and let the market decide. If people bought it, great. If they didn't, well, he'd been poor before and survived. This attitude, simultaneously caring and not caring about success, is one of the hardest mindsets for writers to achieve. Most of us are either desperately hungry for validation or pretending we don't care about it at all. Bukowski found a middle path that allowed him to maintain artistic autonomy while building a sustainable career. The physical act of writing was another challenge Bukowski faced head-on. Unlike writers who romanticize the creative process, he was brutally honest about how difficult it was to actually sit down and produce work on a regular basis. His poems and stories are filled with references to the blank page, the false starts, the days when nothing comes, the grinding daily discipline required to be productive. He developed routines and rituals that helped him work, writing at night, drinking wine while he typed, playing classical music in the background. But he never pretended these were magical solutions. They were just practical strategies for tricking his brain into cooperating with his ambitions. This workmanlike approach to creativity is something many aspiring writers resist, preferring to wait for inspiration to strike. Bukowski understood that inspiration is unreliable. What matters is showing up consistently, even when you don't feel like it. His relationship with critics and the literary establishment reveals another aspect of why writing is so challenging. Bukowski was simultaneously dismissed as crude and lowbrow by academic critics and celebrated as authentic and powerful by readers who felt invisible in more polished literature. This split reception created a constant tension. Was he a real writer or just a novelty act? Did critical disdain matter if readers connected with his work? These questions plague most writers at some level. The literary world is full of hierarchies and gatekeepers, and navigating these systems while maintaining artistic integrity requires a particular kind of strength. Bukowski's solution was to largely ignore the establishment and focus on building direct relationships with his readers through small presses and readings. But this meant accepting that he'd probably never win major awards or be taught in university literature courses. The loneliness of writing is another theme that runs through Bukowski's work and life. Writing is fundamentally a solitary activity. It's just you and the page, trying to make sense of your thoughts and experiences. Even when you're writing about other people, you're doing it alone, in a room, with only your imagination for company. This isolation can be creatively fertile, but it can also be psychologically devastating. Bukowski wrote extensively about this loneliness, the way writers can feel disconnected from normal human relationships because they're always observing, analyzing, turning life into material. There's a cost to constantly viewing your experiences through the lens of potential stories or poems. It can make you feel like you're living at one remove from your own life, which is both useful for art and terrible for mental health. His frank discussion of financial struggles also illuminates why writing is such a difficult profession. For most of his career, Bukowski lived paycheck to paycheck, never knowing where his next rent payment would come from. This uncertainty creates a constant low-level stress that can be creatively paralyzing. It's hard to focus on crafting beautiful sentences when you're worried about keeping the lights on. Even after achieving commercial success, the feast or famine nature of a writing career never entirely disappeared. Book sales are unpredictable, publishers come and go, tastes change. The financial instability that comes with being a creative professional requires a particular kind of psychological resilience that not everyone possesses. Perhaps most importantly, Bukowski's work demonstrates why writing is hard, because it demands complete honesty about subjects most people prefer to avoid. His poems and stories confront aging, death, failure, loneliness, addiction, and disappointment with unflinching directness. This kind of emotional archaeology, digging through your own experiences to find truth worth sharing, is exhausting work. It requires you to revisit painful memories, examine your own failures and limitations, and then find ways to transform that material into something that might be meaningful to strangers. You have to be simultaneously self-absorbed enough to believe your inner life is worth documenting, and selfless enough to shape that documentation into something useful for others. Bukowski died in 1994, having finally achieved the financial security and critical recognition that had eluded him for most of his life. But his work remains a masterclass in the particular challenges of being a writer: the loneliness, the uncertainty, the constant struggle between authenticity and accessibility, the need to transform personal pain into universal art. What makes his example so valuable is how he refused to romanticize any of it. He didn't pretend writing was noble or glamorous or spiritually fulfilling. He treated it like what it often is: hard work that sometimes produces something worthwhile, performed by flawed humans trying to make sense of an frequently senseless world. In our current era of social media and personal branding, when everyone with a laptop considers themselves a writer, Bukowski's example feels more relevant than ever. He reminds us that real writing, the kind that matters, that lasts, that changes people, requires more than just having opinions or experiences. It requires the discipline to refine those experiences into art, the courage to be vulnerable in public, and the persistence to keep going when everything suggests you should quit. That's why being a writer is hard. It's not just a job or a hobby. It's a way of engaging with existence that demands everything you have, while promising nothing in return, except the possibility that your words might matter to someone, somewhere, someday. Bukowski understood this bargain and accepted it, creating work that continues to speak to people who feel lost, lonely, or forgotten by more polite forms of literature. In the end, maybe that's the real lesson of his career. Writing is hard because life is hard, and the only way through both is to show up consistently, tell the truth as you understand it, and hope that someone else recognizes themselves in your particular brand of struggle. It's not much of a guarantee, but for real writers, it's enough. That is it for today. You've been listening to The Guide on the Side, where I share what I'm learning from people, books, and conversations. I hope something here stays with you, sparks a thought, or opens a door. I'm Ivan, and I'll be back soon with more. Until next time, may your days be full of curiosity, and I'll see you in the next episode.